Guys, it's Skybird here, and I wanted to talk for a handful of minutes about the different types of molds that I think are viable when it comes to resin casting with Bionicle. Each of these molds has a certain number of steps involved and have certain benefits and drawbacks to each of them, but I think the main thing you want to really pay attention to is your end result, right? The masks that you get out, what you're going to end up being happiest with. So there are basically a handful of stages for mold making, depending on the type of mold that you are making. So there's the construction of the mold itself. There is the actual pour of the silicone, the initial pour. Sometimes that step is repeated depending on the type of mold that you're making. Then there is the removal of the original piece that you cast from the silicone, the pour of your resin in the new casts, and then the removal of the resin cast and any post cleanup. So basically 5 steps. Some casts have more than others. Some casts are more difficult at certain stages. We're going to start with probably the most popular for casting, and it's with good reason. This is probably going to give you the most consistent results and honestly probably the least cleanup at the end as well. It just has the most steps involved, at least on the front end, and that is actually going to be a 2-part mold. So with a 2-part mold, it can seem a little bit daunting the first time you do it, and the main reason I think that is because you actually have to build up a bed of clay. This is a failed mold that I did. It did not fail because of anything I did, but rather the silicone that I have is very temperamental on what it will actually react with. Even though all the stuff I'm using is supposed to be silicone safe, it does react with the clay. Sulfur free, doesn't matter, still reacts. And it does also just completely melt my hot glue. So it's very weird silicone. I can't necessarily recommend it because of that, but that's not the point of this video. So what you want to do is you basically want to build up a bed of clay for a 2-part mold and create any sort of registration marks. Those are basically going to act as like a lock and key to make sure that the 2 halves of your mold later will only fit together one way. Then you're going to bring that clay up to any hard edges on your piece. This is going to be where your parting lines are later, and so if you bring the clay up to that point, it's going to make your parting lines nearly invisible, and it's going to minimize flashing. So that means that cleanup on this will be much easier. Then what you want to do next is you want to attach any funnels, any venting that you have. I did it incorrectly and actually had the funnel go straight up out of the mask rather than back from the side, which is a little bit weird, but hey, it's whatever. Like I said, this mold ended up failing anyway, so it does not matter. But once you have all that in place, you're then going to want to pour your first layer of silicone. So you let the silicone sit here, you let it cure, then once it is cured, you flip the whole thing over, peel off only the clay, but you leave the vents, you leave the funnel, and you leave the mask in there. Anything else you put in there, you leave. Just take off the clay, clean off any residue of the clay that's left, spray it with mold release or rub on some Vaseline, whatever works with you, and then you want to add your second layer of silicone. You let that cure, and you've basically created a silicone sandwich. So you just peel the 2 halves apart, take the mask, the funnel, the venting, any of that out, and you put the 2 halves together, and you're ready to pour. And that's it. So in terms of those first steps, it is a little bit more intense because you do have to do the build up, the construction of the actual box itself, and all of that is a lot of steps where, variables could make something happen that, might make it fail. But once the actual mold is together, then all of the next steps, I don't know what word I'm thinking of, will be much easier. So the next type of mold is what is called a cut mold. This is another popular type of mold, though I don't really see it used with Bionicle pieces. And I think the main reason for this is that it's a 1-part mold, but with Bionicle pieces, because masks like this are so thin, you're basically fighting against surface tension. So when you actually pour to fill this cavity that's shaped like a mask with resin, it's going to want to push that air down, essentially, but that air also wants to escape, and it has to fight against the actual silicone itself. So it's difficult to do, depending on the type of resin you're using. For something like this, you really want a low viscosity resin, something that degasses very easily. But essentially what you're going to do is you are going to take your mask, you're going to attach a funnel to the mask. I would recommend doing so on the back of the mouthpiece there, and then you're going to basically route that downward and attach the funnel to the base of a cup. You want a taller cup than this, I'm just using it because it's transparent, but the funnel will attach to the base of the cup, and it will hold your mask in suspension so that the mask itself is not touching any of the sides. It's right in the center. Then what you're going to do is you're going to fill that cup with silicone until it gets to the top of the mask, and fill it with a little extra headroom as well. Once that cures, you're then going to flip it over, remove the funnel, which I use clay to make the funnel, but again, my clay reacts, so you do your thing. And then you need to start cutting the mask out of the silicone. So how do you do that? Basically, you're going to go down with like an X-Acto knife or a very sharp blade, cut down to where the mouth hole is, and you're going to want to cut along the jawline, and then cut all the way across the top of the the silicone and down the sides of the silicone until you can basically peel it in half. You don't want to cut it all the way through, because then you'll make a two-part mold, and that can be a problem later. But once those halves are apart, you remove the master piece that you pulled out, the original piece that you pulled out, and then you put the two halves back together. You put some rubber bands around it. That's going to kind of hold it in place, and then you can do your little finessing to make sure that the halves are aligned as well as possible, and then you're ready to pour. So this is all stuff you may want to watch videos on YouTube. It is fairly straightforward for most of these processes, but you know, I'm not showing you necessarily here how to do it. I'm currently using my pressure pot and stuff right now, so I really don't have the option to do so, but I do plan on making a video in the future about each of these. The third type of mold that I made is a hybrid of, well, not a hybrid, it's a modification of the cut mold, but I'm calling it a book mold. And essentially what it is you're going to take a cup, and instead of attaching your mask where it is suspended like this, you're going to actually suspend your mask horizontally inside of the mold. As you can see, there's not a lot of room in a cup like this, but this is the cup that I'm using. The main advantage of that mold is that it uses far less material than the other two. The mold for the Rao that I made, this one here, is actually just over 200 grams of silicone, whereas the mold that I made for the Ruru and now the Matatu, which is currently being cast in this, is about 50 grams, a little over 50 grams. So it's 4 times less silicone, which is nice, and my Rurus have been coming out really good so far. So essentially all of the steps are the same as with the cup mold. You're going to attach your funnel to the mouth of the mask and attach it to the bottom of the cup, but this time you're not kind of angling it, you're just going to go straight down. Make sure that the mask is fully suspended, not touching any of the sides. You're going to backfill it with silicone, and then once it has cured, you're now going to remove that funnel and cut along the mouth straight down to the jawline, and then cut a horizontal line at the jawline. Then you're going to cut up from the mouth up to the top of the head, where the hard edge is on the head, and cut along that as well. What that's going to do is it's going to allow you to actually peel open the silicone like a book, and this is going to make removal of your casts much easier. So with a two-part mold, removal is very easy because you just take the two halves apart and your mask is right there. You just basically plop it out, and then you clean up any sort of flashing you might have, you know, in your time. With the cut mold, it's a little bit more difficult to remove the mask because you have a lot more silicone material to kind of work through, and also the mask, the way it's shaped, is going to want to kind of grab onto different crevices of the silicone, right? So you got to really get down there with your finger and kind of finesse the mask, really get it out of there. With the book mold, it's very hard to remove the first mask, the master, right? The original piece that you cast. But after that has been removed, subsequent masks become much easier than the cut mold, because you just peel it open and basically push up with your thumbs, and the mask will basically eject. You fold it back over and you're ready to cast again. So I really like the book mold. The only thing with it is that you really have to make sure, again, to use a very low viscosity. That means a very thin resin. You want something that's almost watery. And you want something that degasses very easily, because it's probably the most prone to collecting bubbles in the resin. That said, pardon me, the cut mold and the book mold both are still susceptible to catching bubbles in the silicone, which means you're going to be left with extra resin in there. Like that right here is, well, it's hard to see. That right here is an extra dot of resin that I could remove. I could just take a knife and cut through that and sand it and polish it, but you really don't want to have to do that. The whole purpose of casting like this is to try to make your cleanup of the object you're casting as minimal as possible, right? So when you go to process these pieces, you don't have to do much to actually process them, to clean them up. And so for transparent masks specifically, I would highly recommend 2-part molds. It's going to leave you the cleanest parting lines by far, and it's also the least likely to catch bubbles in the silicone, because the silicone is always being cast on the top of the mask, so any bubbles that might appear will rise up away from the object you're casting. Whereas with a book mold or with a cut mold, any vertical shelves in the piece that you're casting are likely to catch bubbles in the silicone, because the bubble will rise and it'll hit that and it has nowhere to go. So you'll need to move that cup around so that the bubbles have time to evacuate the silicone and not get trapped. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Those are the main things here. I guess I'll show real quick my casts from today, or that I pulled today. I just have 2 of them here right now. The other one still needs cleanup. I got busy this morning, but it's kind of a Metru blue. This is with oil paint. Something I realized is that the oil paint actually extends the amount of time it takes for these pieces to cure. So these are much softer than any other masks I've pulled out, but that's fine. It's also not a 100% perfect match for Lego's Metru blue, but I'm also not familiar with this paint. Also, the camera lighting makes this show up as a much starker difference than it actually is, but it's more than usable by any means. In the future, though, I'm going to be using acrylic paint. I was able to finally get it to mix in by mixing it with part A instead of part B with my resin, but your brand will vary. But today I'm doing dark turquoise, which is this one right here. And again, on camera, that looks like there is a subtle difference there. First of all, this is my test from yesterday, so it is darker than I'd like, but in front of my eyes, without the, camera being able to see colors that the human eye can't, it looks nearly flawless. It's slightly darker than I like, but it's well within Lego's tolerance. And if I sent like a piece like that to a customer, I don't think they'd be mad about it at all. Like, it's a really, really good match. But on camera, it shows up as a little bit darker than what your eyes see. And also the lighting is going to affect that too, like I said. So today the mix I made is a little bit lighter. So I'm going to cross my fingers that it's going to be a really good match. But even just this one, as seen here, is more than passable. I am super happy with how it came out. So dark turquoise today. Tomorrow, depending on how these come out, I might make more dark turquoise. I might do black, but I need to get more black paint specifically. Or I might do like Metru brown. We'll see what I decide. So that's pretty much it for this one. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe, because it does help the channel out a lot. As always, my link's in the description. I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.